The Legend of Spyro is iconic in so many ways and has so many beautiful features to it, but if there's one thing that's truly iconic about it, it's got to be the elements. Hey everyone, my name is Sam and welcome back to another video discussing the lore of The Legend of Spyro. I'm sorry it's been so long since I've done one of these. I've just been busy working on other projects really, but again, I've said in previous videos, I have so many lore videos planned for The Legend of Spyro, discussing different things and everything. It's been a long time since I've actually discussed something lore related in one of these videos, because I've mostly been doing alternate histories, and you guys seem to really like that. I really like that, and you know, if you've got any more alternate histories you want me to, you know, do videos on, then leave them down in the comments down below. But today, we're focusing on something actually lore related, and that is the elements. Now, throughout The Legend of Spyro, we've seen a lot of different elements. Some are very popular, some are not so popular, and some we basically know nothing about. So I thought it'd be a cool idea to go over every single element within the entirety of the Legend of Spyro universe. In this video, we're going to be going over each element and talking about all of the abilities associated with each element, what dragons use them, where they were first seen, and any little bits of backstory information where there is any to cover. I should probably mention that some of the abilities that I'm going to be going over in this list don't actually have names, so I've just sort of come up with names based on what the abilities are and what they do. Now, I'm only going to be briefly covering each element because we have a lot to get through, but if you want me to do any individual videos on any of the individual elements, then leave a comment down below and I will do them. I do have specific videos planned for some of the individual elements I'm going to be covering in this video, but if you want anything specific, then leave it down in the comments down below. So without further ado, let's talk about the elements of The Legend of Spyro. Now, altogether, there's actually 13 different elements in the Legend of Spyro universe, and there actually probably could be more that we don't know about. 7 of them are light side elements, 5 of them are dark side elements, and 1 of them is kind of in the middle. We're going to start on the light side of things and talk about the 4 master elements, starting with the first and most iconic element in probably the entire series: fire. Now, obviously, it's no coincidence that fire is one of the main elements in the Legend of Spyro universe. After all, when we think of dragons, we think of fire. Now, fire was the first element we ever saw in the Legend of Spyro universe. Even before we'd met Spyro, in the very first cutscene in New Beginning, we saw Ignitus breathe fire. But fire is one of the 4 master elements, and Jared Pullen himself describes that the fire element is governed by focus control over breathing and expressed by exhalation. So essentially, it's just a powerful and elemental way of breathing. Spyro himself first learnt fire in the swamp in a moment of trauma when he had to defend Sparks from Cinder's forces. Abilities of the fire element include the Fire Breath, which is the only primary elemental ability that is the same throughout all 3 games, the Fire Bomb, Fire Wave Fury, and Fury of Ishlander's Final Stand Fury, all of which are from New Beginning, the Comet Dash from Eternal Night and Dawn of the Dragon, the Comet Wave Fire Fury from Eternal Night, and the Meteor Fireballs used by Malefor in Dawn of the Dragon. Notable dragons that use the fire element included, of course, Spyro, as well as Ignitus, Pyra, and Malefor. Now, as well as being one of the 4 master elements, it seems as though fire has some sort of higher significance in terms of elements. Now, the reason I say this is because Spyro, who is a purple dragon of legend capable of mastering any element, has always learned fire first. In New Beginning and Eternal Night, he gradually learns the elements over a period of days, but regardless of the fact that in Eternal Night he learns them in a different order than he does in New Beginning, it's always fire that he learns first. Now, this could be due to a number of things. Personally, I think it's probably got something to do with the fact that fire is Spyro's signature element, so starting off a new game with the first ability being something like, I don't know, ice would be kind of weird. But I feel like ignoring the story implications of Spyro learning fire first both times is just really an excuse to ignore what could be something kind of cool in the story. Now, as I was thinking about this, I thought at first it might probably have something to do with Spyro's parentage. If you haven't already, go and watch my video discussing who Spyro's father is, you'll probably like it. But then I realized it wasn't just Spyro that learned fire first. Malifaux did as well. And what are the chances of two purple dragons learning the same ability first? And Spyro learned it first twice. It's possible that fire has some sort of higher significance in terms of elements. It may be possible that it was actually one of the first elements to ever be created within the Legend of Spyro universe. It definitely wasn't the first element ever made, because we know for certain that there was definitely at least one element that came before fire. But regardless, moving on to the second of the master elements, we have electricity. Jared Pullen states that in order for a dragon to master electricity, they need to be clever and quick-witted with nerves of steel and an exquisite sense of timing. The electricity element grants electricity dragons higher cognitive function, and he says that electricity is most definitely the thinking dragon's weapon of choice. Electricity was first seen in New Beginning in Dante's Freezer, when Spyro learnt it in a moment of trauma after being struck by a lightning tower. Funnily enough, electricity was actually teased at the very beginning of New Beginning, because the second dragon that we see after Ignitus is actually Voltea, the electricity guardian. While electricity was never mentioned by name or used in that scene, it's kind of cool that the second dragon we saw corresponds with the second element we got. The abilities of electricity include the electric stream breath from New Beginning and Dawn of the Dragon, the electric arcs from New Beginning. Look at it! How fucking useless! Ugh. The electric storm fury and the fury of Angtor's raging storm fury, both of which were from New Beginning as well. The electric orb, electric whirlwind, and electric sphere fury from Eternal Night. The electric sphere attack from Dawn of the Dragon, and the electric blast attack used by Voltea. Notable dragons that use this element include Spyro, Voltea, and although it was never mentioned that Malifaux used electricity, we actually see him use it in the initial flashback when being told about him by the chronicler. Moving on to the third master element, we have ice. Now, Jared states that in order to harness the abilities of ice, a dragon must first learn to understand the nature of water and embrace a steely resolve deep within themselves. We first saw ice in New Beginning in Tall Plains, where Spyro used ice to save Cain the Outlawer from floating off a cliff by freezing the river he was floating down. The abilities of ice include the Ice Stream Breath, Ice Shards, Blizzard Freeze Fury, and the Fury of Perisher's Unending Blizzard Fury, all of which were from New Beginning, the Polar Bomb, Ice Spin Attack, and Icicle Blast Fury from Eternal Night, the Ice Spikes Breath and Snowstorm from Dawn of the Dragon, the Ice Blast Attack used by Cyril, and the Mega Ice Blast used by Malifaux. Notable dragons that used this element included Spyro, Cyril, the Ice Guardian, and of course Malifaux, and it was said that ice was actually the second element that Malifaux learned. Now we move on to the last but certainly not least of the four master elements, Earth. Jared describes Earth as a form founded on the precepts of strength over adversity, willful resolve, and obstinate determination. He explains that it's about embracing a strong connection with nature, and that an Earth's dragon's power suffuses its body, and it persists at all times, but it's at its peak when the dragon is firmly grounded. This is obviously due to the fact that when they're not flying, they're closer to the Earth. Spyro first learned Earth in Munitions Forge, when a bell fell on top of him, and he was forced in a moment of trauma to use his new Earth powers to break out. The abilities of Earth include the Earth Shot Breath, the Earth Bomb, the Rockfall Fury, and the Fury of Kytheron's Wrath of Nature Fury, all of which are from New Beginning, the Earth Flail, Earth Pound, and Earthquake Fury from Eternal Night, the Earth Boulder Attack and Earth Missile used in Dawn of the Dragon, and the Earth Shockwave Attack and Earth Cannonball Attack used by Terrador. Notable dragons that use the Earth element include Spyro, Terrador, and presumably Malifaux. We never get told by the chronicler that Malifaux could use Earth, and we never see him use it in Dawn of the Dragon, but we do know that you have to master all 4 of the base master elements in order to master another element that we're going to be talking about later, so we can assume that Malifaux did master Earth and he can use it. So those are the 4 master elements: fire, electricity, ice, and earth. But believe it or not, there are actually other light side elements that are actually a little lesser known. So let's talk about wind. Well, the first time we saw wind properly for the first time was in Dawn of the Dragon. We were actually told by the chronicler in Eternal Night that wind was actually one of the first elements that Malifaux learned. Despite the fact that we've only heard or seen it used by dark side and corrupted dragons, wind has actually been confirmed to be a light side element by Jared Pullen himself. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but if you don't know, Jared Pullen was the lead concept artist for the first 2 Legend of Spyro games. He was basically the guy drawing up all the concepts for the elements, for the characters, for basically everything in the Legend of Spyro universe, and collaborating with the story writers on which direction the games were gonna go. So basically, considering he's the one that actually designed the elements within the Legend of Spyro, we can assume that everything lore-wise that he's talked about them is canon. And Jared's confirmed that wind is actually a light side element, and wind dragons do actually exist. In fact, we know wind dragons do exist because we have a main character in the Legend of Spyro universe who is actually a wind dragon. Cinder. It's basically been confirmed by Jared that before she was corrupted into a black dragon, Cinder was actually a wind dragon. Now, given the fact that wind was only usable in the 3rd game with Cinder because Spyro never learned it, we don't have that many wind abilities. We only have 2, which are the 2 that Cinder used in Dawn of the Dragon, which are the Cyclone Breath and the Twister Attack. Given that it's one of those lesser known elements, we don't really have a lot of information about wind, but we certainly have more information about wind than we do about the final regular light side element, which is water. Now, I imagine that a lot of you are actually scratching your heads right now, as even pretty big Legend of Spyro fans may not know about this element, and that's completely justified, because it was never mentioned by any character, it was never seen in game, we know of no water dragons and no water abilities. The only reason we know it exists is because Jared told us. Funnily enough, Jared has revealed that water was actually going to be one of the 4 master elements, and that Cyril, who was originally going to be a water guardian, was actually also originally going to be female, which is pretty cool. But frankly, we just don't know anything about the element of water in the Legend of Spyro universe. Jared really hasn't told us anything, and frankly, I don't know if there's actually anything to tell, seeing as, you know, water was replaced with ice. But Jared has told us that water dragons do exist, and that the water element is a light side element that exists. So yeah, that's water, I guess. We don't know a lot about it, but we know it exists. And now we move on to the final light side element, and probably the most powerful element in the whole of the Legend of Spyro universe: Aether. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys know about Aether, but don't know it by that name. And that's pretty justified considering the name Aether was never spoken in-game. But Aether refers to the signature element of the purple dragon, the purple energy that Spyro is able to use at the end of New Beginning. Now, we know it's called Aether for 2 reasons. One of which is that the symbol for it is actually called Aether in the game files of New Beginning, and number 2, Jared told us. But given that no one was nerdy enough to go into the game files back in 2006 when this game came out, everyone called it a different name. Some people called it convexity, some people just called it purple, or, you know, purple power, purple energy. I myself actually called it magic because of Skylanders, because in Skylanders, Spyro is a magic Skylander, and the symbol for magic is purple. But Aether is its actual and canon name, and Jared describes Aether as being the element that makes up the universe. Aether's basically the stuff that makes up the universe, and using the Aether element grants the user control of basically the power of the universe itself. Aether deals with powers beyond the mortal plane and beyond all other elements, which is why it's so powerful. Spyro first learned Aether in an ultimate moment of trauma after being struck by Cinder's Fire Fury, unlocking the true power of the Purple Dragon for the very first time. We've seen Aether take many different forms in our time across the Legend of Spyro games, but the abilities are as follows. The Aether Blast and Ancestral Aether Fury from New Beginning, the Aether Melee attack used before the events of Eternal Night, and the Aether Breath, Aether Cannonball, Aether Comet Dash, and Ascendant Aether Fury used in Dawn of the Dragon. Notable dragons that used Aether include Spyro and presumably an uncorrupted Malifaux. We've been told by Jared that the version of Malifaux we see in Dawn of the Dragon is actually Malifaux's dark form. So, at some point, he must have used light Aether before he was corrupted. But in short, Aether is one of the most powerful abilities within the Legend of Spyro, and it's pretty fucking awesome. So, we've talked about light side elements, and we're about to talk about dark side elements, but before we do, let's talk about an element that's sort of in the middle. Time. Now, whether time can actually be considered an element or not is frankly a whole other discussion, and I think there's actually arguments for both sides. On the one hand, time, or as it's usually referred to, dragon time, has always been referred to more as an ability rather than an element. However, at the end of Eternal Night, Spyro uses what many in the fanbase consider to be a time fury. And while it's never been confirmed that that was a time fury, it has been confirmed that that was a time ability. So due to that, I'm actually inclined to believe that time is an element, just one that's used in a slightly different way than most of the other elements that Spyro and the other dragons have access to. Given that time was only usable in Eternal Night, we only got a few abilities from it, and these included the ability to slow down time and the Time Fury, in quotation marks, used at the end of Eternal Night that Spyro used to save himself, Cinder, and Sparks. Notable dragons that use time include Spyro and possibly Malifaux. We never get any indication by the chronicler or by Malifaux himself that Malifaux was actually ever able to use time, and if he ever did, I'm going to assume that he lost it when he became corrupted. The reason I think this is because if Malifaux had access to time during the events of Dawn of the Dragon, I really don't think that Spyro and Cinder would have been able to beat him, so I'm going to assume that if he ever did have it, he lost it when he got corrupted. Now, you may be thinking that Spyro and Malifaux are the only two candidates for using time, but I'm actually going to go ahead and put the Chronicler up there, because I believe that the Chronicler is a time dragon. Specifically, I believe that the Chronicler is the one and only time dragon in the entirety of the Legend of Spyro universe. Now, the Chronicler is definitely a dragon that requires his own video, but up until the very end of Dawn of the Dragon, we really didn't know that much about the Chronicler. We knew from Ignitus that he was an ancient dragon of immeasurable wisdom, but apart from that, we really don't know a lot. Not to mention, as a dragon, he's a bit of a weird color in that he's sort of a silvery white. And we've never seen a dragon that color before. And usually the color of a dragon tends to represent what element they are. And we've never seen a dragon that looks like that before. Now, I'm sure some people could make the argument that the Chronicler is a wind dragon, but frankly, I think that is a pretty ridiculous notion, and we're just saying that because, you know, wind is, you know, the symbol is white and he's white, and I don't think that's the case. But up until the end of Dawn of the Dragon, we knew nothing about the Chronicler. But then, in the final end credit cutscene, we saw that the Chronicler is not actually just one dragon. It's more of a role that's passed on. And actually, in Dawn of the Dragon, in a flashback to the construction of Warfang, we can actually see a dragon that looks very, very similar to the Chronicler. And I believe that actually is the Chronicler before he became the Chronicler. So it seems as though the Chronicler is a role that is passed on to different dragons who are worthy of it, and those dragons change from their elements to become time dragons. The Chronicler is definitely a dragon that requires his own separate video, so we're gonna move on and talk about the dark side elements. Now, you may be thinking, what makes these dark side elements? Well, Jared has actually confirmed that these elements that I'm about to talk about come from a different, darker entity than all of the 4 base master elements, as well as wind and water. So these are canonically dark side elements, and the first of which is poison. Now, we first saw poison introduced in Dawn of the Dragon, and despite the fact that Cinder is a wind dragon, so her main element should be wind, in all promotional material, it seems as though Cinder's favorite element was poison. Again, because it was only used by Cinder and we haven't seen it used or mentioned by any other dragon, we only have 2 abilities, which are the Venom Blast Breath and the Scorpion Strike. Notable dragons that use the element of poison are Cinder and presumably Malifaux. Most of these abilities we don't ever see Malifaux use, but given that we're told Cinder got these elements from Malifaux, we can assume that Malifaux does have them. Now, because these are dark side elements that were only used by Cinder and not by Spyro, we really don't have a lot of other information on them, so we're going to move on to the next dark side element, which is fear. Fear was another one of Cinder's corrupted elements, and it manifested itself as a sort of weird red energy that focused on the paralysis of living things. Yeah, it's pretty creepy. Just like poison, we only have the 2 abilities that we saw in Dawn of the Dragon, which are the Siren Scream attack and the Phantom Fright attack, both used by Cinder in Dawn of the Dragon. Notable dragons included Cinder and again, presumably Malifaux. Moving on, we have the element of Shadow. The final element in Cinder's corrupted arsenal. Shadow manifests itself as, well, Shadow. I guess that was kind of obvious. The 2 abilities that we've seen from Shadow are the Shadow Strike attack and the Shadow Fire Breath, both of which are pretty cool and both of which we saw from Cinder in Dawn of the Dragon. Notable dragons that use the Shadow ability include Cinder and of course Malifaux, presumably as well. Now, before we move on and talk about the final and most powerful dark side element, I'm going to talk about an element that I guarantee you next to none of you will know exists. And that is dark fire. Now, I know what you're thinking, what are you talking about? Well, dark fire actually refers to the element used by corrupted Cinder in New Beginning. Because if you think back to New Beginning, despite the fact that Cinder presumably had access to all of her elements that she has in Dawn of the Dragon while she was corrupted, the only element we ever see her use is fire. But this isn't regular fire. If you actually look at the fire that Cinder breathes, some of it is actually laced with purple, almost like it's corrupted. What I personally believe dark fire to be is fire corrupted by the final element that we're going to talk about after this. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Yeah, this is all well and good, but there's not actually any proof that dark fire exists and that what Cinder uses isn't just regular fire. Well, actually, there kind of is. While Darkfire's never actually been mentioned by name in any of the games, in a bit of merchandise for the Eternal Night, which was actually a collector card for Cinder, it states that her favorite element is Shadow Fire. So technically the name for it is Shadow Fire. I just prefer to call it Dark Fire because we already have Shadow as an ability. Now obviously this is just a bit of merchandise, but this would suggest that Dark Fire, or Shadow Fire, is actually an element within the Legend of Spyro universe. So, I think it is actually an element, and I think that is what Cinder uses in New Beginning. The abilities of Darkfire include the Darkfire Breath, Darkfire Fireball, and the Darkfire Fury, all of which were used by Cinder in New Beginning. And as for notable dragons, the only dragon that we've seen use Darkfire is Corrupted Cinder. We've never had any proof that Malefor was able to use Darkfire, but given that all of Cinder's abilities that aren't wind supposedly come from him, we can assume that it is possible that Malefor probably could use Darkfire as well. Now, we don't know whether or not Cinder is still able to use Darkfire after she was purged of her corruption. I mean, she has all of the other dark side abilities, so I don't see why she wouldn't have Darkfire, but we didn't see her use it in Dawn of the Dragon. I should probably also mention that I believe it was confirmed by Jared that originally Cinder was supposed to have green fire, which probably would have distinguished it more from regular fire, and more people would consider it a separate element. I can't specifically remember whether it was for New Beginning or Dawn of the Dragon. I'm pretty sure it was for New Beginning, and the reason they changed it to regular looking fire with a bit of purple in it was because Earth was already green, and they didn't really want to have two elements that were green. So now it's time to move on to the final element on the list, and the most powerful dark side element of the lot: Dark Aether. Now, as its name suggests, Dark Aether is the dark side corrupted version of the element of Aether. And it has been confirmed by Jared that Aether, or if you like, Light Aether, and Dark Aether are two separate elements, or rather, two different usable sides of the same element. Dark Aether is basically what happens when a purple dragon strays from their intended path and taps into the force of darkness to access the dark side of their true power. As I mentioned earlier, I believe what Dark Fire is the regular light side element of fire combined with Dark Aether. Which raises the question as to whether or not the other light side elements could be corrupted by Dark Aether. We first saw Dark Aether at the end of Eternal Night, when Spyro was corrupted by the Night of Eternal Darkness and became Dark Spyro. When a purple dragon taps into the power of Dark Aether, they turn into their dark form. And it has been confirmed by Jared that the Malefor that we see in Dawn of the Dragon is his dark form, just like Dark Spyro is Spyro's dark form. The only difference is that Jared has told us that Malefor has actually learned to control his dark form and control Dark Aether rather than it controlling him. However, he has hinted that at some point Dark Aether may take control of Malefor once again, suggesting that perhaps Dark Aether is a force that can never be controlled. Regardless, we've actually seen quite a few abilities from Dark Aether, most of which come from Malefor. These include the Dark Aether Beam, Super Speed Dark Aether Melee Attack, and the Dark Aether Devastator Fury, all from Eternal Night, the Dark Aether Breath used by Cinder in Dawn of the Dragon, and get ready, the Dark Aether Fire Breath, Dark Aether Comet Dash, Dark Aether Shield, Dark Aether Pound, Dark Aether Pulse, Dark Aether Slash, and Dark Aether Shock Blast, all of which were used by Malefor. Notable dragons that used Dark Aether included Spyro, obviously as Dark Spyro, Cinder, and Malefor. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is all of the known elements within the entirety of the Legend of Spyro universe. Like I said, there could be many more that we don't know about, but obviously the Legend of Spyro lore is kind of shrouded in mystery, and we don't know how much was left on the cutting room floor of the games. There could be many more elements that were never realized and put into the lore. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you feel so inclined, because it really helps me out. I forgot to mention this in the video, but I'd like to give a huge shout out to Artisan Dragon on DeviantArt. They were the one who drew the poison, fear, wind, and shadow symbols in the style of the first two games. And I'd also like to give a massive thank you to Sweet Hamaru, a good friend of mine, for drawing the water, time, and dark fire symbols. I really appreciate the help, Hamaru, and this video wouldn't have been possible without you. Leave down in the comments down below what your favorite element is, and also leave down below what you want me to talk about in the next Legend of Spyro video, be it a specific element, a piece of the lore, or an alternate history that you want me to explore. That rhymed. And if you want to stay up to date with everything that I'm doing, including videos, live streams, teasers for future projects, or if you just want to come and chat with me, then I have a Discord server down in the description down below. And I've even got a bunch of cosmetic roles for all of the elements of the Legend of Spyro. So yeah, go and join that. So thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I will see you on another video very soon. Goodbye, everyone.